some time learning about great individuals who have successfully followed their compasses, one who faltered for a time, and reviewed a few who perhaps have broken compasses. Let's now look at the value of identifying our own core values. Over the next several slides, we'll show you 10 reasons why each one of us should consider assessing and identifying our core values. Then we'll talk about how each of us can do just that. First, identifying our core values gives us purpose in life. Value gives us direction or a set of standards to follow. Ultimately, this focused path helps each of us to grow, progress, and succeed. Identifying our core values helps us bring our standards into focus. When we know what to expect, we're better able to adhere to boundaries. Next, identifying our values makes decision-making easier. Again, having a set of standards or boundaries encourages us to make choices in our own best interest. Defining our values helps us to identify people, situations, and objects that do not support our values. Once identified, we can attempt to avoid and try to live away from these things that may hold us back. On a more positive note, clearly defined values help us to identify people, situations, and objects that we do want in our lives. Keeping these positive forces around will ultimately help us to make good choices and thereby lead to success and happiness. Defining our values also helps us to let go of goals that may not be our own. Clearly defined values help us to see when we have been striving for something that others have imposed on us or that we think we should want. Individual values lead us to uphold our personal standards instead of having us live up to someone else's ideal. Defining our values is also a great yardstick for goal setting. It's easier to achieve goals that are based on our values rather than some outside tangible award. We're encouraged by natural momentum to move toward these goals. All in all, people are more inclined to move toward a goal that doesn't feel like work. You can't be true to yourself if you don't know, understand, and accept yourself first. This is what core values are all about. Once we discover who we are, we don't have to work to be someone or something that we're not. And in that, we gain confidence, freedom, and happiness. You are free to be yourself and to show the world that you're proud of the way you are. Finally, defining our core values makes life simpler. The standard to which we measure each decision and response is already known. There's no guesswork. Spending less time weighing pros and cons can be very liberating and lends more time and energy to do other things. So you may be wondering, what does all of this have to do with leadership? A unified life that communicates a consistent message builds the trust of observers. Your ability to influence flows out of who you are and who you are becoming, which makes you credible to others. The bottom line here is visibly acting out your defined core values and consistently adhering to those values is what communicates reliability, predictability, and credibility to others. These are the building blocks of influence, which is the true essence of leadership. A person is not a leader simply because they're in a higher ranking position, any more than they are a leader simply because they're at the head of a pack. There's a runner in the picture on the slide that should be coming up very soon. This current leader who's circled here, if he were to fall out of the race or turn in the wrong direction or injure himself, wouldn't you just keep right on going if you were behind him? A person doesn't lead simply because they are in front, even if they happen to be moving in the same direction and toward the same goal. People must choose to follow someone in order for him or her to be considered a leader. Let's listen again to Bill George give us some advice to leaders who want to improve their skills of influence. He talks about how an authentic leader leads by being true to his roots and by having a coherence in his life story.
Bill, tell me why you advocate a personal development plan.
One of the things that came out of our interviews with 125 authentic leaders was the need to take responsibility for developing yourself, all the way from gaining self-awareness about who you are, to being clear about your values and principles, to balancing your intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, to leading an integrated life. These are all things you have to do if you're going to be a fully developed leader. And then, as a result of all that work, you know the purpose of your leadership.
So where do you start?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness. I think it starts with developing emotional intelligence by having a clear sense of who you are and what grounding you come from, and being true to your roots. And if you can have a coherence in your life story, we found that leaders didn't want to talk about their skills and competencies. They wanted to talk about their life stories, about where they'd come from, who they were, the influence of their parents or a teacher or a coach, or a very negative experience like a crucible they went through at some point in their life.
So now that we understand what core values are and why a leader should identify and adhere to them, let's take a look at how we can identify our own. While we won't actually complete a core values assessment today, we want to provide you with a methodology and step through it briefly. We'll be providing you all with a resource packet via email later today, which will include exactly what you see here in the webinar, in addition to tips for how to walk through the assessment on your own or in a group. When you do sit down to complete your own core values assessment, you'll know you're ready when you acknowledge that this process requires introspection and that we desire to identify our actual core values and not those that we think we should have. Then before you move on, you want to acknowledge that your core values are unique to you. Therefore, you'll be able to identify them most effectively if you're not influenced by outside sources. Conversely, if you're identifying them within a group or a team in a professional setting, the fundamental beliefs you'll look at will be held by most individuals in the group, and therefore you need to be identifying them together. The core values of individuals and families may already have much similarity, but it can be valuable to identify your core values as a unit so that you can have a code of sorts with which you all agree to adhere. Now we're going to step through a methodology for identifying your personal core values, and then we'll briefly touch on a few additional details regarding identification of group, team, workplace, or family core values. Please remember that this methodology is just a guide. You may find that omitting some steps or adding extra exercises to help you in your introspection is beneficial for your own personal style of learning and your personal style of processing information. The process of identifying your core values is not an exercise with which any of us can actually complete in just a few minutes. And beyond that, it's a personal exercise, which we wouldn't want to do here in a webinar setting. So we'll step through the process and then leave you with the resources to identify your core values on your own. You may choose to use those materials individually or at a local leadership development group meeting.